Excellencies, foreign delegates, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning to all of you. Thank you, Asfar, for inviting me here. And I think it's a great service that Asfar and some of our other colleagues do to our cities and to our country by bringing us all together and making sure that there's exchange of ideas. So thank you for inviting me. Today, my responsibilities in the Caretaker government is of energy, but I think it will be injustice on my part if I speak only about energy today, because energy is a very small part of the future, of the big picture that we are trying to create here. So I'll touch upon energy, but I have organized my talk in three parts. First is I'll briefly talk about what the future is looking like. Secondly, where do we stand today? And thirdly, how do we participate in that future? Because if we only talk about future and we don't talk about how we will participate and what's our strategy to participate in that, then I don't think we'll be able to get much out of this gathering. So what does the future look like? I think today it's a no-brainer that science and technology is the driving force which will shape the way we all live going forward. Who could have imagined a few years ago that we will, let's say 3 decades ago, that we will all be having our smartphones today, and while sitting here, a lot of work will be happening, will be a lot more productive compared to what we could have been 3 decades ago. Who could have imagined that social media and the Twitter trends that we just talked about will be part of our life? Who could have imagined that we all will be talking about introducing more and more EVs into our lives? Who could have imagined that there will be driverless cars in the world? And this is all happening. So this is where we are. Just a few years ago, who could have imagined that ChatGPT will be an important part of our existence? And that's happening. Who could have imagined that billions of dollars of trading will be taking place in cryptocurrencies powered by blockchain? But that's happening. All these technologies, all these innovations will be ruling our world going forward. But I think there's a lot more which will happen. The way we live 10, 20 years down the line will be very different as compared to the way we are living even today. There are companies in the West which are already working on flying cars. Now, when we talk about it, it seems like an unreal thing, but it's going to happen. The speed with which we communicate from one point A to point B, that speed will grow, the time will shrink, the world will be a much smaller place compared to what it is. The distances will be traveled at a much faster speed. The level of information, the level of knowledge, the data will be many-fold compared to what it is today. Human beings are trying to conquer space, and we will inshallah do that. So the world that will be there, the future that will be there, the future for which we are all gathered here, I think it will be very, very different compared to what we are seeing today. The way today's world is very different compared to somebody who was living 30, 40 years ago could have imagined. And that's the future that we have to be ready for. That's the future that we have to be a part of. Now, before I go any further, let's talk about where do we stand today. This summit is happening in Pakistan. So we need to take stock of our own situation, of our own positioning in the world. Where do we stand today? What are some of the issues, some of the big issues that we face today? Because unless we realize and unless we talk about what are the issues that we are facing today, we cannot plan for the future that we will be entering. Now, some of the big conversations, big themes that we all talk about, I'll just touch upon a few points here. Tax to GDP. We still have almost a single digit tax to GDP, which is among the lowest in the world. We talk about SOEs, we talk about privatization, we talk about ghost schools, we talk about being the low-income country today. A decade ago, 15 years ago, Pakistan GDP per capita was more than some of our neighboring countries. And today, we are actually 60% of Bangladesh and India. So when we imagine the world, when we roam around the world, countries have today are way ahead of what they were 10 or 20 years ago. But unfortunately, today in Pakistan, we give examples of how good we were in 1960s or how good we were in 2000s. So we have actually regressed, and that's the reality that we have to accept. And with this reality, only can we change our future. We still are stuck in issues like informal economy. We are stuck in hundi and hawala. We are stuck in power theft. One of the big jobs that we had at hand when the caretaker government came was the power theft and the gas theft. And we have done a massive crackdown on that. One of the big issues we face is people are not paying their bills. Now, if some people don't pay their bills, then others do compensate for that. And we are stuck with brain drain. We are stuck with very high rate of population growth. Bangladesh in 71 had higher population than we had at that time. Today, if their population growth was the same that we have faced in the recent past, their per capita GDP would have been a lot lower than what it is. So they have managed to control that. So these are some of the realities that we are facing today. And this brings me to the last part of my talk today, which is the most important part, that how do we participate in the future? The future that we are seeing, the reality that we are seeing today, how do we as a country participate in that? How do we participate in a happy future? But I'll just take a pause here and I'll talk about my portfolio on energy, because that also touches a bit about the future. And then I'll go to the big question that how do we participate in the future? Energy is the lifeline of any nation. Today, we are still faced with around 50 million people in Pakistan who do not have proper access to electricity. They are either on weak grid or they are off grid. People in villages are still using wood and other fuel sources for their livelihood. We still are not able to provide even water to a large part, to a certain percentage of our population. Where have we gone wrong? I think we have gone wrong in planning, and I think we have gone wrong in policies. When we started our reform program in 1990s, at that time, the level of knowledge and information was much lower. However, 10 years after that, we had learned a lot of lessons, but we did not implement those lessons. So our planning and policy function has been very weak. Where do we need to go from here? Pakistan is among the lowest per capita consumer of electricity. On one hand, we talk about having excess electricity. On the other hand, we are not able to provide electricity to our people. On one hand, we are saying we should not have any more power plants. On the other hand, we're still doing load shedding. So there is a mismatch, there's a flaw somewhere. The flaw is that we have not kept our generation, transmission, and distribution systems in sync with each other. Electricity is just like a commodity today. Countries who have more of it should be selling it to the ones who need it, and vice versa. We have not even started importing and exporting electricity. We have not even thought about creating a regional grid. Countries in Central Asia, countries in Europe already have it. Recently, we changed the gas pricing structure because there were massive losses in the gas system. Now, what that was doing, that was leading to non-payment for the gas companies, which was leading to lack of exploration, which was leading to Pakistan's import bill going up, which was leading to balance of payment crisis. So, in the energy, we need to think about the future. We need to think about regional grids. We need to think about a policy and pricing framework. And in all of this, we need to keep issues like climate, renewables, energy conservation in mind. So at the ministry, this is what we are thinking about. This is what we are working. We already focused on that. One big reform has taken place. And within the short period of time that we have in the caretaker government, we are trying to reduce the circular debt stock as much as possible. We're trying to bring payments in line. We're trying to look at the tariff in a way that our issues of capacity payment and some other issues are sorted. So briefly on the energy. Now I'll go to the last part of my talk, which is how do we participate in the future? We have talked about the future, we have talked about where we are, how do we participate in the future? Now I think all of us will have different recipes to solve our problems. But some of the issues that I highlighted, there's some, and there are a number of other issues that I've not even touched upon. So if we want to address all the issues, it is humanly not possible. Policymakers cannot address all the issues in one go. They have to begin somewhere. And we need to ring fence, and we need to have a framework. Now people talk about that the institution should be fixed. And I know there is research by Ashimoglu and Robinson, Why Nations Fail. But there is another research that you can't fix institutions unless the economy has got enough purchasing power and growth. What comes first, institutions or economic growth? Now the countries who have progressed people talk about corruption. The countries have progressed despite weaker institutions, despite corruption, despite not having the perfect education system. So we need to first decide what our big focus will be. India doesn't have the best institutions today. China has faced corruption, we all know that. Malaysia and Singapore initially 50 years ago did not focus on these things. So in order to participate in the future, the big question that we need to ask and answer is, where do we begin? What do we focus on? What's the framework that we will create? And I think the framework that I would leave you with is, we need to have a framework where we have a few objectives, few big objectives, and those objectives will lead to strategies, and the strategies will lead to the action points. So what should be the 2 or 3 big objectives that we should focus on? And those objectives will keep changing. They won't be consistent forever, maybe for the next 5 years. And I think Pakistan needs to focus on 2 big objectives, and those should be exports and formalizing the economy. Why exports? I think exports is one thing. For example, China, their mantra was manufacturing, being the factory for the rest of the world. India, IT, and being the back office for the rest of the world. So there's 1 or 2 big things that we need to focus on. Now, if we focus on exports, now that leads to a number of strategic steps that we need to take. Some of them will be, what should be the role of state? Government's footprint and SOEs are leading to inefficiencies. That's leading to misallocation of our scarce resources, financial and human. That's affecting the meritocracy in the economy. That's leading to some people not being competent enough but being rewarded unfairly. So if we focus on exports, we will need to answer, what do we do with the SOEs? What should be the government's footprint in the business? We will need to talk about the currency. How do we manage our currency? What should be the exchange rate which makes our exports competitive? In order to have a stable currency, there will be a number of steps we'll need to think about. If we focus on exports, we'll have to talk about the interest rates. Businesses cannot be competitive with a very high interest rate. And we will need to focus on our fiscal deficit, on our borrowing. If we focus on exports, we will have to talk about the energy pricing. With a very high energy pricing, industries can't be competitive. We'll talk about agriculture yields that was touched upon today. We'll talk about population growth and female participation. No country, besides the one who have got natural resources like oil, no country in the last 50 or 100 years has grown consistently without an active female participation in their workforce. It's proven research, because when you have female participation, it leads to a higher per capita income, and it leads to low wages for the industry. We need to talk about labor arbitrage, because labor arbitrage will lead to exports. Pakistan today is much cheaper compared to the rest of the world in terms of IT exports. We have a large pool of young people, and we are not even focused on vocational training in the country. There's a huge demand in the neighboring countries for vocational training. So the objective to increase our exports will lead to a number of other strategies that we will have to think about, and that will solve a number of issues that we are facing today. The second big objective I think we should think about is formalizing the economy. Now we have, as I said, we have one of the lowest tax to GDP in the world. We have one of the highest currency in circulation. I mean, we are living in a world. I was in China last month, and I made payment of a dinner with a credit card. And there was some people, and they said, and there was like the facial expression changed, and I didn't know why it changed. And they said, we actually use WeChat and Alipay here. So, and when you go to a normal hawker store, people are taking payment from credit card. The economies have formalized, have documented themselves. When we talk about formalizing the economy, besides tax to GDP, we'll have to automate things. We'll have to bring technology. NADRA will need to get strong. We will need to talk about corporatization. In Pakistan, we have more than 3 million businesses, and only 100,000 of them are corporatized. We do not have a business registry in this country at the moment. We don't have data that who is doing what business. Globally, even a newspaper stall gets some sort of a certification. Unless we the corporate sector in the country is not flourishing, because if you are a corporate, you pay higher tax compared to partnership or sole proprietorship. There is no regulator like SECP. There is no audit requirement. So we are actually discouraging corporatization. So when we focus on formalizing the economy, a number of our ills will automatically be answered. So what do we do to achieve these two big objectives? I think there are two things that we need to start with. Firstly, I think the planning function in our country is highly underrated. We do not focus on that. Traditionally, we have focused on financial planning and not economic planning. We need to spend more time, we need to give more focus to the planning function. Because unless we plan, how do we know what objectives do we want to focus on? How do we know what strategies to focus on to achieve those objectives, and what action points to focus on to implement those strategies? So the planning function, I think, needs a lot more focus in Pakistan compared to what we have done in the past. The energy sector I talked about, planning, policies, that was the missing link. Second thing that we should do, and I think these are two things we should start with: focus on planning. Secondly, we need to bring our academia, private sector and public sector closer to each other. They're not in sync. There is a disconnect here. The academia has a lot of information, knowledge, research. The private sector has a lot of practical knowledge, and the public sector is making policies. Unless we bring the three together, I don't think we'll be able to plan and come up with the right policies in the country. I believe Pakistan is at a crossroad. We have a huge potential that we can achieve, but for that, we will need to sit together, to think, to plan, and to strategize. And inshallah, with events like these, with conversations like these, and with these messages going to the public sector and to the policymakers, Pakistan will be a part of a happy and progressive future. Thank you very much.